After coming home from school, Emily was in her room doing her homework. She quickly finished up and went downstairs to meet her father. James turned to the officers, crossed his arms, and asked, "What's this about?" "As her father, I need to know." The agents responded vaguely, saying, "The less we tell you, the better." James didn't like this answer and was about to demand more information when suddenly, a soft voice came from the stairs. "Yes, Daddy?" Emily asked, looking at the officers with wide, frightened eyes. "Hello, sweetheart, could you come down here, please? These men will be leaving soon, but they just want to ask you a few questions first." She nodded and approached her father, trusting that he would protect her no matter what. One of the officers knelt in front of her and introduced himself as Officer Smith. "Hello, Emily. Thanks for talking with me," he began. He then asked her a few questions about her route to and from school. He seemed to know exactly where she walked and somehow also knew that the day before, she had given her lunch to a homeless man. James was surprised to hear this. He had no idea she'd done that but tried his best to keep his surprise hidden from the officers. After Officer Smith asked Emily everything he wanted to know, he thanked her and James, then left in his patrol car. James watched them go as Emily returned to her room. He noticed the officers didn't look too happy, and he had a bad feeling about the whole situation. James closed the door and went to his daughter's room, determined to find out more about why they wanted to speak with her. "Emily, I heard the officer mention something about you giving your lunch to a man who lives on the street. Can you tell me more about that?" He asked gently, not wanting to scare her or make her feel uncomfortable. "He was hungry, Daddy," she said, and James couldn't help but smile. He knew Emily was a sweet girl who always saw the best in people. However, he reminded her not to talk to strangers on the street and asked her to be careful, and she promised she would be, somewhat naively. James thought that was the end of the story. But in reality, it was just the beginning. When his wife, Laura, came home from work that day, James told her what had happened. At first, she was very worried, but he reassured her that everything was fine and told her exactly what questions the agents had asked their daughter. Finally, Laura calmed down but decided to take action nonetheless. The next day, she decided to accompany Emily to school. She wanted to see the homeless man and ensure that her daughter wasn't getting into dangerous situations. She didn't know that by doing this, she was actually putting both of them in danger, but she would soon find out. Laura woke up early that morning, full of energy and with a sense of purpose. In the kitchen, she whipped up batter and flipped pancakes, filling the room with the comforting aroma of breakfast. She served orange juice to Emily and set the table with a smile. This simple morning routine helped to calm her nerves about what might happen next. As they sat down to eat, Laura tried to keep the conversation light. "So, Emily, what's the man you gave your lunch to like?" she asked, spreading butter on her pancake. She watched Emily's expression, hoping to learn more about the stranger without alarming her. The girl, absorbed in her breakfast, seemed oblivious to her mother's underlying concern. "Did you notice anything different about him?" Laura continued gently, wanting to understand if there was anything unusual about this homeless man that might explain why the police were interested. Emily thought for a moment, her fork paused in the air. "Not really," she finally said. "He just seemed really hungry and sad." After breakfast, mother and daughter left for school. The sun was shining, casting long shadows on the sidewalk as they walked. Laura kept the conversation going, asking about Emily's upcoming school projects and her friends. She knew these walks were now more than just a simple morning routine, they were an opportunity to ensure her daughter's safety and comfort. As they neared the school, Emily looked at her mother. "I gave him my sandwich because he needed it more than I did," she said with a serious tone in her young voice. Laura nodded, appreciating her daughter's kindness but also feeling a pang of worry. She hugged Emily, grateful for the open communication between them, as they continued walking. When they reached the usual spot where the homeless man sat, Emily pointed him out to Laura. "He's not there today, Mom," she said, frowning slightly with confusion. It was unusual for him to be absent since Emily had seen him there almost every day. Laura nodded and noticed the empty space on the sidewalk but kept her worries to herself. The girl's initial surprise faded as they approached the school, and her attention quickly turned to a poster about the upcoming science fair. "Look, Mom, we're starting our projects next week," she exclaimed, pointing excitedly. The homeless man slipped from her mind as she chatted about her project ideas, her energy unaffected by her previous concern. They arrived at school, and Laura gave Emily a big hug and a kiss on the forehead. "Have a great day, honey," she said, smiling warmly. She lingered for a moment, watching her daughter run up the stairs and disappear into the bustling school building. Laura felt a mix of pride and lingering worry as she waved goodbye, thinking about her daughter's safety as a top priority. Once Emily was safely inside, Laura retraced her steps to the spot where the homeless man usually sat. Her curiosity piqued, she wondered about his absence, hoping nothing bad had happened to him. The area was quiet, the usual morning bustle of the city resonating in the empty space. She paused, observing her surroundings before moving toward where Emily had last seen him. Hidden behind some bushes, she found a small tent, surprisingly well concealed. She approached it cautiously, greeted timidly, but received no answer. The tent flapped gently in the morning breeze, empty and apparently abandoned. There were no personal belongings or signs of recent activity, it seemed as if no one had been there for days. Laura quickened her pace, her heart beating a little faster as she felt eyes on her. She glanced over her shoulder and scanned the street, narrowing her eyes as she tried to spot any movement or figure that might explain the disturbance. Her hand rested lightly on the curtain, ready to pull it back at the slightest hint of danger. From her vantage point, Laura saw nothing out of the ordinary. The street was calm, with the usual suburban tranquility. She observed a bit longer, her gaze sweeping across the yard in search of any sign that someone had been there. Despite the normality, she couldn't shake off a sense of vigilance, and her instincts were on high alert. Moments later, her eyes caught a quick movement at the edge of her property. Laura squinted, and her breath caught as she recognized the figure, a homeless man, darting away from her garden. He moved swiftly, almost as if he realized he'd been seen. Laura's heart pounded. It was him, without a doubt, the man Emily had been helping. As soon as Laura spotted the man, she dashed out the door, determined to catch up with him. Recognizing him from her daughter's detailed descriptions, she hurried down the pathway, eyes fixed on the figure moving quickly away. The morning chill brushed her as she kept her steps swift and focused, trying to close the gap between them. Despite her efforts, the man was fast, his strides were long and rapid. Laura followed as best she could, but he soon turned a corner and disappeared from sight. Panting, she stopped at the corner, scanning the area, but he was nowhere to be seen. With a deep sigh, she realized the chase was over for now. Frustrated but undeterred, she returned home, her mind racing with thoughts about what to do next. As she walked back, she formulated a plan, determined to get to the bottom of these strange events. Once inside, she sat at the kitchen table, a central place for thinking and planning. With her resolution firm, it was clear to Laura that she needed to discuss the situation with her husband immediately. She knew he'd want to be involved, especially since it concerned their daughter's safety. Picking up her phone, she dialed his number, her fingers tapping anxiously on the table as she waited for him to answer. "James, you need to know what just happened," she began as soon as he picked up. She quickly explained how she'd seen the homeless man outside their house and how he'd run away when she tried to approach him. Her voice was urgent, conveying the seriousness of the situation. She recounted every detail, ensuring he understood the gravity of the moment. After discussing the situation, Laura and James agreed it was best for him to pick up Emily from school that day. Their concern for her safety was paramount, and they weren't going to take any risks. James left work early and drove to the school, a mix of anxiety and determination filling him. He knew the importance of keeping their daughter safe, especially given the unsettling events of the day. On the way home, James and Laura spoke on the phone about other precautions. They decided that Emily shouldn't walk home alone for the foreseeable future. "We need to make sure she's safe at all times," James said firmly, and when James arrived at the school, Emily greeted him with a cheerful, carefree smile, chatting about her day, unaware of her parents' growing concerns. James listened, his heart heavy, knowing he needed to keep her informed but wanting to preserve her innocence for a bit longer. He smiled back at her, hiding his worries, as they drove home. Once back at the house, as they settled in, James mentioned to Laura that the man hadn't returned to his usual spot. "I checked again on the way back," he said, looking out the window toward the street. This absence added another layer of concern for them. It was unusual and unsettling, making them wonder about the reasons behind his disappearance. That night, sensing her parents' tension, Emily expressed her concern. "Please make sure he's not hurt," she pleaded, her eyes wide with worry. She deeply cared for the homeless man, remembering his kind smile when she'd given him her lunch. Her plea was sincere, driven by genuine concern for his well-being, even amid her parents' growing anxiety. Despite Emily's heartfelt pleas, James felt a mounting urgency to ensure his family's safety. He decided to involve the police, believing that understanding their interest in the homeless man could help protect everyone. He dialed the local precinct and firmly requested to speak to the officer in charge, ready to exchange any necessary information. James provided details about the man's frequent presence near their home and Emily's interactions with him. He asked the officers to explain their repeated inquiries and their presence, hoping for some transparency. The conversation was serious as he listened attentively, prepared to learn why this man had attracted the police's attention in the first place. The reason behind the police's interest shocked James, and his face went pale as he processed the information. It was far more serious and complex than he had imagined, leaving him momentarily speechless. After the phone call, his mind drifted, reflecting on the new details, aware that the stakes were higher than he'd initially thought. Realizing the gravity of the situation, James knew he couldn't stay idle. The police's revelation changed his understanding and spurred him into action. He decided to find the man himself, believing that a direct intervention could prevent further complications. His decision was swift, driven by a newfound urgency to resolve the unfolding drama. Without wasting another moment, James grabbed his coat and keys from the hook by the door. "I need to find him before it's too late," he told Laura, his voice tense with determination. He glanced at his watch, calculating the ever-dwindling hours of daylight, then stepped out the door, driven by a mix of fear and resolve to locate the man as quickly as possible. James drove through the neighborhood, scanning every corner and alley for any sign of the homeless man, who he now knew as Tom. He expanded his search to nearby areas where he thought Tom might seek shelter. Each street seemed quieter as night approached, the shadows growing longer, and the chances of finding Tom seemed to dwindle. His gaze was steady, hopeful but anxious for a breakthrough. As daylight faded into night, James's frustration grew. He had passed countless places, circled parks, and glanced into dimly lit areas, but there was no sign of Tom. Each passing hour heightened his concern, mixed with a sense of urgency. He checked his watch, it was the promised time to return home. His efforts were waning and seemed increasingly futile. Persistence finally paid off when, just as he was almost ready to head home, James decided to check one last location, a dark corner of the local park. There, partially hidden by shadows, was the homeless man. Relief flooded over James, mingled with a rush of adrenaline. He parked his car and approached silently, careful not to startle him, his heart pounding with the implications of this moment. As James neared, the homeless man sensed his presence and tensed up, ready to flee. "Tom," James called softly, hoping to calm him. Despite his gentle tone, Tom took a few quick steps back, following his instinct to escape. Determined not to let him disappear again, James quickened his pace, focusing on closing the distance between them. James quickened his pace, his focus solely on reaching Tom before he vanished again. As he got closer, he called out in a calm yet reassuring tone, "Tom, it's me, Emily's father." At the mention of Emily's name, Tom hesitated, turning slightly toward James, his expression cautious but curious. Taking this as a positive sign, James continued his approach, his relief almost tangible as he saw Tom's guarded stance relax ever so slightly. "I just want to make sure you're all right," James assured him gently, hoping his sincerity would help ease the homeless man's nerves. Tom's eyes softened as he listened, the tension in his shoulders starting to loosen. Sensing the connection forming between them, James went on, explaining that his intentions were purely to help. After a few moments of conversation, Tom nodded slowly and agreed to get into James's car. "I'll take you to the hospital to make sure everything's okay," James offered, opening the passenger door. Tom hesitated, his eyes lingering on the car seat, but then he stepped forward, placing his trust in James's promise of assistance. With Tom safely in the car, James drove with a renewed sense of urgency, glancing over occasionally to ensure that Tom was doing all right. The streets became a maze as he navigated toward the hospital, each turn and stop executed with precision yet urgency. The air in the car was thick with the weight of the situation. Both men were acutely aware of the importance of getting Tom the help he needed as soon as possible. As they neared the hospital, Tom looked at James with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for helping me," he said softly, his voice tinged with relief. "I'm sorry if I scared your family." James nodded, acknowledging the man's apology and understanding the circumstances. This was a moment of mutual respect and understanding. Once they reached the hospital entrance, James parked and helped Tom inside. The medical staff quickly admitted Tom and began treating him for what turned out to be an allergic reaction from the sandwich Emily had given him. The nurses and doctors worked efficiently, administering the necessary treatments to alleviate his symptoms. Tom, visibly uncomfortable in the sterile surroundings, expressed his thanks but seemed overwhelmed by the thought of potential medical bills. With worry evident in his eyes, Tom explained to James, "I left the hospital as soon as I could last time. It wasn't the hospital that scared me, it was the thought of the bill." His voice held a quiet apprehension, revealing a deep-rooted fear of the costs that loomed over him. This revelation shed light on his sudden disappearance, clarifying the desperate measures he'd taken to avoid a financial burden he couldn't handle. James had already learned from the police that their interest in finding Tom wasn't to arrest him but rather to offer help. They wanted to inform him about a new healthcare program specifically designed for the homeless, which would cover his medical expenses and provide him with necessary care, all without adding any financial strain. As Tom listened to the explanation, his expression softened, the weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. This healthcare program promised to cover the costs of his treatment, an opportunity he had never imagined possible. The officers explained that the initiative aimed to give homeless individuals access to essential health services without fear of overwhelming bills. Hearing this, Tom's shoulders relaxed, realizing that this could be a turning point in his life. With a sense of immense relief, he agreed to complete his treatment under the new program. Grateful for the unexpected assistance, Tom acknowledged that this change could significantly improve his situation. While sitting in the hospital, now more relaxed and hopeful, Tom felt deeply thankful for the series of events that had led to this moment, realizing that the help he needed was finally within reach. After receiving the proper care, Tom's health improved noticeably, thanks to the dedicated medical attention and the subsequent relief of financial worries. Leaving the hospital with James and Laura, Tom felt a surge of health and hope. His smile was brighter, his steps more confident, reflecting the immediate impact of support and care. James and Laura took it upon themselves to guide Tom through the application process for the new healthcare program. They sat with him, going over forms and explaining the finer details, supporting him through each step. Their kitchen table transformed into an improvised office as they filled out paperwork and made necessary calls, determined to help Tom secure his future. However, James and Laura didn't stop at healthcare. They also took steps to help Tom find work, reaching out to community contacts and seeking out local job opportunities. They assisted him in preparing for interviews and refining his resume. Their efforts paid off when Tom received a job offer from a nearby business, a role that promised stability and a fresh start. With a job now secured, the next step was finding him a place to call home. James and Laura joined Tom in the search, attending apartment viewings and helping with rental applications. When Tom signed the lease for a small, cozy apartment, it was a milestone for everyone. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Tom was excited for this new beginning in a space he could finally call his own. The transformation in Tom was profound. His presence soon became a warm and welcome part of James, Laura, and especially little Emily's lives. Adopting the role of Uncle Tom with pride, he attended Emily's school events and spent weekends at the park with the family. His gratitude for their help turned into a lasting bond, enriching all their lives just as much as his own. If you enjoyed today's story, I'm sure the next video that appears on your screen will move you as well. The months passed, and Tom's life gradually transformed. The job he'd secured allowed him to regain confidence and stability, and he quickly became a respected and cherished figure within his community. As time went on, he even found himself considering the possibility of going back to school part-time to study social work, inspired by the kindness he'd received and a desire to give back. Over the years, Tom became a volunteer at the same shelter he once relied on, helping others in difficult situations regain their footing. Meanwhile, James and Laura felt a renewed sense of purpose and fulfillment from the role they played in Tom's life. This experience opened their eyes to the often overlooked needs within their community. They became actively involved in local charities, organizing initiatives to support vulnerable individuals. Laura, who worked in human resources, began dedicating some of her time to creating employment opportunities for those with barriers to work, partnering with local shelters to offer job training workshops. James, too, found ways to extend his business network to aid charitable causes, often organizing fundraisers and donation drives. For Emily, the impact of her actions stayed with her as she grew up. Tom's story and their shared journey left a lasting mark on her, shaping her into a young woman with a strong sense of compassion and a commitment to helping others. Inspired by her friendship with Tom and her parents' involvement in the community, Emily eventually decided to pursue a career in healthcare. She envisioned herself working as a nurse or perhaps even as a social worker, roles where she could directly impact the lives of those in need. Over the years, Tom remained close to James, Laura, and Emily. He celebrated birthdays, attended school events, and shared holidays with the family. His presence became a source of joy and warmth, particularly for Emily, who always saw him as more than just a friend. He was like family. Tom's own journey became an example of resilience and transformation, one that he shared with Emily as she matured, reminding her that one act of kindness could change someone's life forever. As the years passed, James and Laura felt pride watching the ripple effect of their actions spread not only in Tom's life but also in their daughter's journey toward adulthood. Emily, inspired by the experience, eventually went on to work in a large hospital, where she became known for her empathy and dedication to her patients. She often remembered her family's encounter with Tom, a reminder that compassion and second chances could change lives in ways they'd never expected. Together, James, Laura, Emily, and Tom continued to support one another, connected by a shared history that served as a testament to the strength of kindness, family, and community. And even as they each took on new roles in their lives, they always found time to come together, reminding themselves of the day a simple sandwich started a journey that transformed all their lives.